Focusing our time on celebrating gifts, and we began by celebrating big gifts from the Master Teacher Jesus, the Lord's Prayer, and then the greatest commandment of all, the commandment to love. And today we're celebrating a gift from God, and that's the gift of spiritual guidance. Not only are we celebrating the gift of God's guidance, we're linking it with a specific aspect of the Christmas story, that guiding star. We are a metaphysical, spiritual community, and we look at all the events that are going on in our lives, and we look at even stories from the past, specifically stories from the Bible, with a metaphysical lens. So in that idea, with that idea of looking with a metaphysical lens, lens, we look at what our co-founder Charles Fillmore said: the star, or spiritual illumination, leads us to the realization of Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now he was quoting Colossians 1:27 when he said, Christ in you, the hope of glory. But really what he was talking about was when we open ourselves up, when we open our minds and open our hearts, we'll recognize that that spiritual illumination is in us always as our own divinity, as our infinite potential. Herbert Hunt, who was a Unity scholar, said it a little bit differently. He said, the star spoken of represents the infinite intelligence within you, which guides and directs you and reveals to you the answer. And I really like that idea of the infinite intelligence within us, because what it's really saying is we're not going outside to find it. We're opening our awareness to what's already here, and we're allowing our infinite intelligence to emerge, to guide us, to direct us, and to reveal to us the solutions that we're looking for to resolve the problems or the issues that we're facing in our lives. Another thing Herbert Hunt said was that people have been trying to identify what that star really was. And in his time, and he became the Dean of Biblical Studies in 1959 at Unity Institute, at that time, in his time, it was believed that the star was Halley's Comet, was an appearance of Halley's Comet. I saw Ikea Seiki when I was 6 years old. How many people have actually seen a comet? Like seen a comet? See, there's a bunch of us that have actually seen a comet, so you know how awesome, how awesomely cool seeing a comet really is. But the current scholarship, or more accurately stated, the theory today that has the greatest validity, comes out of the Center for Astrophysics at Notre Dame. Dr. Grant Matthews has published a paper about what the current theory is, and then states all his reasons why he believes it to be true. In his research, the very first thing he did was to pin down the date that Herod died, because he figured when the Magi came to see Herod, Herod was still alive. And when they asked him questions, Herod was still alive. So if he could figure out when Herod was still alive, then he could figure out that Jesus was born sometime after that. So he went back and he did all this research, and Herod's death is recorded as occurring after a lunar eclipse, but before Passover. So he went back and he looked at all the records that the Chinese kept and other astronomers kept, and he determined that Herod died sometime after March 12th in the year 6 BCE. Okay, so we have a date. And then what he did was he created a window 2 years on either side to look for other signs, for other occurrences. He looked at what events happened with stars or comets between 8 BCE and 4 BCE. And what he recognized is there were two events, and it didn't have anything to do with a nova or a supernova, and it didn't have anything to do with a comet. There weren't any of those things that happened in that time period between March 12th and Passover. What happened were two events in the year, are you ready for it? 6 BCE, one in February and one in April. And what those two events were the convergence of a planetary alignment. A convergence of a planetary alignment that gave off an emanation. So how was it that these magi saw the emanation? Because what Herbert Hunt noticed and observed was the magi saw the star, but Herod did not. How could Herod not see the star? How could that be? And in order to kind of explore that, what Dr. Hunt did was he did a little bit of backstory research on the Magi. They were astronomers. They were trained in the Hellenistic or the Greek system of astronomy that associated every planet, every star, every sun, our sun, and the moon with a geographic location or an event. So all of this put together was that the Magi had a system of understanding astrology where they could see this emanation, but Herod, who wasn't trained in astronomy, could not see it. So between the two dates in the year 6 BCE, Dr. Matthews favors the one in April. Now, how many of you are familiar with the idea that Jesus was not born in December, but he was actually born closer to Passover? Okay, we're still not moving Christmas. But between the two dates, Dr. Matthews preferred the April date. It was April 17th, 6 BE to be exact. And these are some of the things that Dr. Hunt said about this date. And then the other thing Dr. Matthews did was layer in some astrology. He said the sun, Jupiter, and the moon, and the Saturn were all in Aries. Now, Aries was the geographical area that was represented by that constellation, Aries. So Judea and Aries were already linked through the system, the Hellenic system of astronomy. Mars is in Taurus. This alignment is very rare throughout all millennia. Number 2, recent evidence based on a coin minted in Antioch to commemorate this alignment would be particularly significant for a person born in Judea. Jupiter and the moon in the same sign meant a powerful leader and teacher would be born and would die at an appointed time. Adding Saturn to Jupiter and the moon makes that leader and teacher most powerful. The attending planets of Venus and Mars support the significance of that leader and teacher. And finally, Jupiter would have been in retrograde for about 6 months after this alignment, making it appear that it was standing still or going before those who were traveling from the east. So, the Magi could see it, but Herod couldn't. And if you know the story from the book of Matthew, Herod was a little bit tricky because he said to those Magi, when you're finished honoring that newborn king, you just come back by here and tell me where he is so that I can honor him too. But tricky, he was trying to kill him. So the best explanation that I can find for all of this comes from 1 Corinthians. Spiritual things must be discerned spiritually. So the system that anyone has, whether it be astronomy like the Magi had, when we come to discerning spiritual guidance from God, we have to do it spiritually. And we can categorize all the different kinds of spiritual discernment. In addition to astronomy, we can call them, today we call people clairvoyant if they discern spiritually by seeing images. We call people clairaudient if they discern spiritually by hearing words. We call people clairtangential if they need to touch something in order to discern it spiritually, or clairempathy if they need to feel it from one another. So we have all these different systems, these different contexts that we can use, or paradigms, if you will, to discern spiritual things spiritually. So that helps me make sense of why the Magi could see it and why Herod couldn't, because quite frankly, Herod wasn't very spiritual at all, right? Okay, so by now you're like, how do I do this? I want to have my own system. I got questions. How do we receive it? How do we discern that the guidance we are receiving is for us and not someone else? How do we teach ourselves to ask the right inner questions in meditation and be patient for the answers? I know, speaking for myself, that sometimes I allow my anxiety to override my patience, kicking me into reckless actions instead of waiting and being patient. And then finally, how do we come to trust ourselves that what we are hearing is actually guidance? You know, we have received messages our whole lives. Messages like, you're too big for your britches. Who do you think you are? What were you thinking? And you're not going to do that, are you? So we have to clear away all of that debris to create the space for our guidance to come through. Florence Scovel Shinn, the New Thought writer, says, sit and wait. Sit and wait, and the vision will come to you. The guidance will come to you. We can't force guidance to happen. We can't force our vision to appear, but we can sit in meditation and allow it to come from within. I want to tell you a story about an Air Force navigator who was shot down from his plane in the Vietnam War. He was on his 63rd combat mission when his plane was hit by a missile. And he was the only one of the crew who successfully ejected, and he came down in a rice paddy and he went to cover. Now he landed in just south of the DMZ, where the North Vietnamese troops were advancing, and they estimated that there were about 30,000 North Vietnamese troops in the area, in addition to tanks and heavy artillery. Hamilton, Gene Hamilton was his name, he was able to use his emergency radio to communicate with U.S. forces, and what he started doing was telling them where enemy supply lines were, and the United States was able to come in and successfully cut off those supply lines for the North Vietnamese. But what became more and more apparent is his rescue needed to be imminent, because eventually he was going to get captured and he didn't want that. So the U.S. Air Force launched their largest campaign to rescue a single person in the Vietnam War. They came in several times with air attempts and were not successful. So finally, the Navy SEALs came up with a plan. There was a river not too far from where Hamilton was called the Cam Lo River, and they said, you know, if you can get your guy here, we will create that as our rendezvous point. Knowing that the North Vietnamese monitored the radios and could speak English, they wanted to give Hamilton information in code. And so the first thing they said to them was, get to the snake, make like Esther Williams, and float to Boston. So we already know that it's a river, so we can interpret the code as get to the river, make like Esther Williams means swim. Today we would have said make like Michael Phelps, and then float to Boston, which is going in which direction? East. Well, from here, northwest, but generally speaking, from Vietnam, it would have been east. So while Hamilton recognized that there were going to be many villages and troops and armaments that he needed to get around, he began to wonder where the river was and what to do. The rescue team was meanwhile frantically interviewing every acquaintance, every coworker, every fellow soldier, officer that Hamilton had ever worked with to try to figure out if there was a system or a context in which they could couch their communications. And what they discovered, that Hamilton was an avid golfer, and he had a vivid memory of every hole on his favorite course. So the first communication that went to Hamilton was, we're going to play 18 holes, and the first one is hole number 1 at Tucson National. Now it took Hamilton a little while to figure out what that meant, But when he recalled what the course was like, the first hole was 408 yards heading southwest. So he began to follow the directions hole by hole, play by play. And at one time, on the 9th day, he was directed to play hole number 4 at Abilene Country Club, which meant he would be going right by a deserted village. He got to the outskirts of that deserted village and out popped a rooster. Hamilton said, food. Food. In his ordeal, he lost 45 pounds. Right after that, he was dehydrated, and they directed him to play the 4th hole at Corona del Tucson, in which case he was directed right to the center of a banana plantation where he could cut holes out of the banana trees and water would pour forth and he could drink that. 11.5 days later, he reached the rendezvous point after getting lost numerous times, after falling off a cliff and breaking his arm. But he came home. He came home because he had a guidance system. He had a context with which to receive guidance from God, guidance from his fellow men. So my question to you is, what's your star? What is your star? Because we all have a star. And in 2008, they did a survey where people said their source of guidance, 23% inspirational person, 27% inspirational books, 17% said they only go to church as their source of guidance. I like to think there's a combination here. 4% said an inspirational movie, 4% said internet search, and 17% said uncertain. But I venture to say that none of these are stars. This is the content that comes within the context. This is the vehicle that comes within the system. So the Magi had astronomy to use as their content. Hamlin had golf courses to use as a vehicle for his content. I think I'm not the only one. We have unity to use as our paradigm to practice. We have a structure, a context, a language, and a paradigm to practice within. In unity, I love being clairaudient. I love getting messages from other people that I'm talking to. I hear words, and in my meditation, I hear God's voice. God says, and when God says things, it's more than E.F. Hutton. I listen. Because that's the way my internal guidance system works. That's the way my infinite intelligence works. That's the way my spiritual illumination works. So the question is again, what's your star? What is your star? What context, what structure, what paradigm do you have for allowing the illumination, the guidance of God that is yours every day? And then I'm going to tell you that none of that matters. Because the guidance brings us all to the same place. The guidance brings us to a vibrant life. The guidance brings us to a life filled with abundance. The guidance brings us to the kingdom of heaven, to love, to joy, and to peace. These are the greatest gifts to celebrate at Christmas and all the year round, the gifts of love and joy and peace. I'm going to invite the choir to come up. We're going to sing Dona Nobis Pacem. You are welcome to join us as we get ready to go into meditation.